Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's The Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be taking a look into the important articles which have appeared in today's The Hindu Newspaper, the Delhi edition. Now, in total, we shall be having a discussion for 7 topics, few of them relevant in detailed discussion for mains examination, few of them relevant for your prelims bits itself. At the end of the session, I would advise you to go to the Telegram channel and take up the questions, the multiple choice questions which can be framed from this particular area in order to have an assessment of your level of understanding for the analysis as well. So let us take a look at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for today. So first of all, we shall be analyzing the articles which have appeared in the editorial page, that is Scan the Internal Dimension on the Road to 2024. Now this is an article about internal security that will be relevant for your GS paper 3. And also sometimes you find the relevance even in the essay paper. Then at Delhi Summit, demonstrate climate leadership. So it is a kind of an article which harps upon the utility of multilateral forums and institutes such as the G20 forum in order to advocate and enhance the fight against climate change. So this will also be relevant for your GS paper 3. This has also appeared in the editorial section. Then here you have a separate smaller article which has appeared in the editorial page that is about the Indo-Greek relationships. So that is about old ties. Again, this is relevant basically in your, sometimes even in your essay preparation, sometimes even in GS paper 2. Now, news media versus ChatGPT. You have various different news channels and also various different reporting houses which have stood up in arms against the open AI and the platform that is ChatGPT. So we are going to talk about that. We are going to familiarize ourselves with a couple of technical terminologies as well. This is also going to be relevant for your GS paper 3. Okay. Now, for the portion of prelims, we will take a look into population growth, not a panacea. Now, this is a report which has been generated by Moody's. So we are going to understand very briefly that the population growth, it cannot always be a solution if the qualitative aspect of the population is not taken care of. Then the Q1 current account deficit that has narrowed, and there is a prospect of a widening current account deficit in quarter 2 as well. So we'll take a brief look into that. And LK99, not a superconductor, that has appeared in the science section. So this is again something that we are going to discuss for. So let us take a look at the first article of the day. So the first article which has appeared in the editorial section, that is in page 6. Now this is Scan the Internal Dimension on the Road to 2024. So this is an article where M.K. Narayanan, who has previously held the position of governor, position of the National Security Advisor as well, and also as a head of Intelligence Bureau. Now, M.K. Narayanan here has talked about the various different challenges that India confronts moving into the election year of 2024. And the challenges here that are talked about are the challenges of internal security. Now here, why 2024 is harped upon or stressed upon is because we are all aware that 2024 is the time or the eve of the general elections which are supposedly to be held. Now, every time that the general elections are held or whenever there is a massive electoral exercise in any part of the country, oftentimes there are challenges on the internal security front. And that is something that we need to be cognizant upon. So in this article, he has highlighted 3 to 4 important areas which we need to be on a guard against, or we should be on an alert mode in order to tackle these problems. So let us understand what are the various threats on the side of internal security which is emerging on the path to 2024. So first of all, when we talk about the internal security situation prevalent as of now, the article also talks about the fact that how presently we have had a period of calm. For a longer period of time, we have not seen any kind of untoward incident in terms of the internal security being threatened across the country. However, there are certain chasms, there are certain cracks which have appeared here and there. For example, in the northeastern region, now we are all aware what has unfolded in Manipur. Now, what has unfolded in Manipur can be thought about, as per the article, as a microcosm of the situation and the volatile situation which can always exist in the entirety of the northeastern states. And that is owing to the various different ethnic realities, the population and the demographic distribution, and also the maintenance of ties cross-border. For example, when we talk about the northeastern region here, you have the tribal affiliations which are not only state dependent. It is oftentimes something which percolates across various different states and oftentimes across the countries as well. For example, if you take the case of Kukichins, now there you have a sizable population living in the bordering areas of Bangladesh as well, in the bordering areas of Myanmar as well, and substantial proportion and substantial population living also in the region of Mizoram. Then when you talk about the Chins from Myanmar, so Mizos of Mizoram have a kind of a tribal affiliation with Kukis and Zomis of Manipur. Then you have the Chins from Myanmar and Kuki-Chins of Bangladesh also holding a kind of a tribal affiliation towards them. So this brings about a very complex relationship in between the various different ethnicities. So what he is basically symbolizing at or signaling at is a real situation which can emerge where, let's suppose, a particular ethnicity is targeted or is actually undergoing significant amount of social violence in any particular part of the state. That can rile up emotions and sentiments in the other adjoining states as well. And given the fact that there the border that we share with Myanmar, now that border is not fenced in proper. That border allows for the movement of people for some distance. So thereby you have a frequent mobility of people from the Indian states into the region of Myanmar in certain cases, and vice versa also tends to happen. And as was indicated by the government's response in the parliament as well, that you had a situation where a military crackdown did happen in Myanmar, which led to a mass scale exodus of these various ethnic tribes into the northeastern states, and that has in a way vitiated the atmosphere in that region to a slight bit. Now, once you have the riling up of the sentimentalities, you have the presence of enough amount of arms and ammunitions in the region to rile up any kind of disturbance in that area. And for that, we need to be on our toes. We need to be very, very alert, because before we know it, this can spiral into a problem that we had witnessed decades earlier, or if you take a look back around 2 to 3 decades, you would observe that the entirety of the northeastern region was very volatile. It could be spurred into violent activities with the slightest amount of instigations out there. And you had various different outfits. For example, if you take the case of NSCN, now National Socialist Council of Nagaland. Now NSCN also had 2 different branches. You also had the prominent role played by ULFA. Now all these insurgents, all these were categorized into the category of terrorists, because they would be known to carry out terrorist activities and terrorist uprisings against the state itself, against the authority of the state. With the prevalence of such kind of a border, with the prevalence of the very easily available arms and ammunitions, and many of the times it is not only the local arms and ammunitions which can create a problem, it is also the supply of arms from the foreign agents, the non-state actors which are there. Now in the northeastern region, we have had a history which indicates that the arms proliferation in that region has happened with the help of and the active involvement of PLA, that is the People Liberation Army of China. So there you have a natural supply of arms and ammunitions, and in the growing age of miscommunication and misinformation, where what is truth is oftentimes lost in the various narratives that are woven around it, there can be a significant scope for disturbances created in that region. So this is one front that we have to be very beware of. That is in the region of the northeastern states and the volatile peace which is achieved. Then the other area that the writer or the author actually tells us is a region of focus is the left-wing extremist influenced areas, or the LWE areas. Now we do know that the Naxal movement which had its genesis or origin in the region of West Bengal. Now, largely that Naxal movement has in a way tempered down. Earlier Naxal incidents and these extremist events would be marked by various different types of attacks against the state, which would basically lead to heavy casualties on the side of the security forces, 70 to 80 people losing their lives on a regular basis. Now, yes, there is a decrease in the number of such massive attacks which have been taking place, but nonetheless, there, as the article points out, that this movement is finding increased prevalence and prominence in the urban areas, where the ideology, even though it is losing ground in the rural areas, the ideology is gaining traction in the urban areas, where the policy making, the decision making can also be influenced by these ideology, as has been indicated in the article. Now here, if you take a look at the LWE impacted areas, or the areas which are affected or impacted in some way or the other by these extremist elements, overall you would see that the trend indicates there is a general decline. What earlier used to be signified as a very massive red corridor spanning across the entirety of the forested region of the central, eastern and the southern part of the country, now that has diminished into certain pockets. But nonetheless, you still have highly affected districts. 25 of the districts across the country, they are highly impacted by these left-wing extremist elements. So it might always be possible that in order to make their presence felt, they can always induce a large-scale attack or a large-scale damage on the security forces, because please understand, for them it will be a symbolic event. For them it will be an event which shows that they are still relevant. But nonetheless, here you have to focus why there is a declining relevance. Declining relevance. Where? In the rural areas. Many of the rural areas, not all the rural areas, but many of them. So that is because overall you will observe that the principled ideology which was behind the entire genesis of the movement, that ideology has gotten vitiated. Now no longer this ideology stands for the upliftment of the poor and providing social justice. That is not the ideology anymore. The ideology has been resorted to charging levies, extortion, kidnapping, killings, etc. So that is because of dilution of the ideology. Now, various different successive governments at the center, they have worked significantly harder in order to bring forward the light of development in these areas, impacted areas. And by the programs such as the infrastructural development program, the aspirational district program, light of development has started reaching these areas. And once the areas and all the districts and the rural areas, they start receiving the basic necessities of life, such as, let's suppose, the construction of a house, construction of the road links, construction of telecommunication network, construction and availability of facilities such as electricity, such as drinking water supply. Thereby, they are not oftentimes encouraged, and generally they will never be encouraged to pick up arms against the government, because that is not the nature. In general, the nature is never to be very violent. So that is why developmental process is also another important aspect. Okay, the developmental process. But then, other than that, you also have, with the increased laying of communication lines and the lines of various different communication channels, the security apparatus in this area has also been strengthened. Further, to add on to that, you have all the various different states who have developed their own standard operating procedure, as well as specialized trained forces and armed commandos who are trained only in order to take or tackle these urban, or in general the various different problems which is posed by the LWE elements out there. So improvement in the security apparatus. Improved security settings. Okay, that will include the extension of various different command centers which have been established in the most impacted district, the holding of regular training exercise, better coordination with the intelligence agencies, a better monitoring of the activities, and all of that has come on the backdrop of infrastructure development, that is the road links as well as telecommunication. So here infrastructure can also be focused upon. But then the threat that has been indicated as per this article is the fact that the influence is now shifting to the urban areas. That is where we need to be on a very strong footing to ensure that whatever the ideology is, its entirety of the portion should be something that people should be aware of. And again, I would repeat that in the present age of the digital media, where misinformation is much more easier spread as compared to the correct truth, that is where we need to be on our toes. But then he also talks about right-wing extremism. He talks about the fact that despite a period of lull, and the fact that India has not witnessed a major terrorist attack or a major attack by foreign agents for a long period of time, we cannot be complacent in our endeavor to provide lasting peace. He talks about the fact that when we talk about the various different non-state actors such as, let's suppose, ISIS, for example, let's suppose the fragments of certain terrorist organizations operating from our western neighborhood. Now, they have been lying silent for a long period of time. Now, in the case of the ISIS, and there had been a significant amount of internal strife when it comes to who will head that caliphate. But now that all of that has been sorted out, ISIS has actually triangulated upon the countries such as India and Indonesia. They have been triangulated, they have been targeted, and it is aimed as per their standard. They are aiming it to launch an attack in these two countries. So ISIS is, or the Islamic State in itself, that is a major threat. Then you have various terrorist groups. Now many of the terrorist groups, particularly across the western border, that is, who are operating from the safe havens in Pakistan, many of them are biding their time to launch a massive attack if possible, in particularly in this region of Jammu and Kashmir, and also across the internal territory of the country as well. So that is where the problem lies. That is where we have to be very, very careful that a terrorist event, let's suppose, is carried out in any of the states of the country, any of the regions of the country, that will put India in a very bad light. And that is not good for the overall democratic process. That is not good for the overall peace and harmony to prevail. Now here, he highlights that along with these threats, there is also an increased threat of polarization. Polarization, that is, where you have the entire country and the entire society getting divided and getting increasingly opinionated in one or the other direction. Now that polarization oftentimes can lead to fundamentalism as well, where you are very stringent about your own particular faith and belief, and you start becoming intolerant over the other particular faiths and beliefs which are observed, which are followed. So that polarization is thought to be a bigger threat owing to the events and incidents which have happened in the region of Nu in Haryana, and also in the recent events which have happened particularly in the case of an RPF constable as well, which has indicated that the communal lines in the society, they are getting deeper and deeper. Now these communal lines, they can always instigate a kind of a social strife, a disharmony, and it can instigate a massive public reaction against maybe a false narrative which has been put out. And it has been indicated as per few of the evidences that many people across various different parts of the society, oftentimes nowadays they are ready to come into action, or oftentimes they are ready to wage a kind of a communal internal disharmony against the other community. And that is because of growing sense of polarization. That is, whether you are with us or you are against us, that polarization is leading to communalism and fundamentalism. This can lead to riots in general, and social disharmony, and that will distort the overall positioning that the country is seeking to position itself right now as a leader of the global south, as an important member, as one of the largest democracies of the world, and an advocate for human rights. It is in that situation where all these events, any of these events, if they unfold themselves, that can be disastrous. So that is what the article largely talks about. Here the article does not provide you with a kind of a way forward, but in general, if you have to think about the way forward, how we can deal with all of this, you need to strengthen your policing. That is, the law and order situation needs to be strengthened quite significantly. And yes, there are police reforms also which have been suggested, but it is not a short-term solution. It is a long-term solution. When we talk about the policing reforms, we don't know when it will happen and whether at all it will happen anywhere in the country or not. But nonetheless, the policing needs to be stronger. It needs to be unbiased in the sense that the policing need not always bend down to the particular local government or the state government involved. It needs to be very, very neutral, and it needs to be perceived as doing justice. There also, you also need to strengthen the intelligence security apparatus, where you should have the prior information, the state should have the prior idea whether there will be a kind of a violence. For example, in any part of northeastern state, if let's suppose there is a sudden accumulation of lot of arms and ammunitions happening in any particular area, that is a forebearer of the process where violence can always be instigated. So that is where we need to be very careful, we need to be on our toes. So overall, in this article, we have taken a look at the volatile situation in the Northeast. Why it is volatile? Because of the very different tribal affiliations, the cross-cultural movement of people, and also ample amount of arms which are prevalent. Then the left-wing extremism danger, then the right-wing extremism. It can include the attacks imposed on India by IAS, by the various different terrorist organizations, and also polarization leading to fundamentalism can lead to a communal disharmony and a communal strife. Now, after that, we move to the second article, and the second article is at Delhi Summit, Demonstrate Climate Leadership. Now, this is an article which has also appeared in the editorial section. Okay. And this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 3. Now here, if you take a look at it, this is an article which has been written by 3 different researchers belonging from the Stockholm Environment Institute. Now this talks about that how forum like G20 can be used to enhance our fight against climate change. Because when it comes to climate change, all the various nations convening under the aegis of G20, they are responsible for majority of the carbon emissions which is happening out into the nature. And they are the ones who are also responsible for bringing about the climate change upon us at a much quicker rate. So that is why it is very pertinent for these countries to hold a discussion that what can be done and what is the process that they will initiate. If they rectify their own processes, then chances are that the global environment will be much better, in a much better health and in a much better condition than it was before. Now here, even though the signs are a bit progressive, few of the signs and indications are in a way positive and optimistic. For example, majority of these G20 polluters, while they do pollute significantly, almost all of them have indicated their net zero targets. What do we mean by that? That means all of them have designated a target year by which they will achieve net zero status. Now, net zero emission very briefly is what? The net zero emission means that whatever amount of carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide equivalent that you are emitting into the atmosphere, you ensure that the similar amount is sequestered or is stored parallelly or simultaneously. So overall, you are not adding anything surplus into the atmosphere. So for example, India has set a target of net zero by when? So the target set by India is 2070. Then all these countries included in the G20 forum, now they have their own requirements for the renewables, and the utility of renewables is increasing. For example, as per the data, in 2010, the amount of renewable energy being used in these countries was around 19%. And that has increased in 2021, where the amount of renewable energy used is 29%. So the amount of renewable energy being used is quite significantly increasing. If you consider India, which is setting an example in terms of cleaner energy. Now India has set itself a target that by 2030, we will have a whopping 50% of our energy mix comprised only of renewables. So that is where India, being the host and being the president of G20 forum, that is showing the way by example setting. We are not following the trend of the world where everyone is violating their Paris agreements and their own INDCs as promised as per the Paris agreement. We are sticking to our goals, and we are setting ambitious goals in the process as well. So remember the Panchamrit declaration and the Panchamrit program that India had declared at the Conference of Parties 26, which was held in Glasgow in December 2021, where India had indicated various promises to the world. One of the promise was to achieve net zero emission target by 2070. One of them was to increase the amount of renewables in the energy mixture to almost 50%. Another one was to reduce the carbon intensity in the GDP to around 45%. Now all of these are monumental if they are followed, and India is following up to that. Now, the G20 summit, which is going to be held in the second week of September, where the global heads of state will convene, at that point of time, it is very pertinent to have some amount of dialogue, some amount of the future pathway being laid, because that will serve as a precursor for the Conference of Parties number 28. That is a part of UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Conference of Parties number 28 is going to be held later this year in the month of around November, December in Dubai. So dialogue setting can be initiated from the G20 forum itself. Now, what are the various different ways by which we can accelerate the fight against climate change? That is what the article talks about. So first of all, it is the clear governance structure. Now here the clear governance structure talks about the entirety of the devolution, that if you are trying to fight climate change, what is your plan of action at the local level? What is your plan of action at the state level? What is your plan of action at the central level? It cannot always be a top-down approach. It needs to be a bottoms-up approach as well, where each and every arm of governance, they are made accountable for the various different changes that need to be brought about. That is only when the change will be sustainable. Also, when we are carrying out any kind of transition into the cleaner or a greener economy, there needs to be a qualitative analysis. For example, as of now, the analysis which is made for the economic models is just the number of jobs created. But that analysis needs to change to, let's suppose, by shifting to the greener energy or greener economy, what kind of jobs are created? Which members across the society, they are getting the facility or the advantage of such jobs? So that kind of added quality analysis needs to be carried out. So governance structure, so that is accountability, across the local and other forms of government, right? Then also qualitative analysis of jobs created, so as to ensure a meaningful social development. When we talk about the entire principle of sustainability, sustainable development is driven by three pillars or three principles. as was declared as per the Rio Plus 20 summit. So these three principles are social development, economic development, as well as a greener economy. So if these three are carried out, only then will you have sustainability, and sustainability is important in order to fight climate change. So this is where you will be able to achieve a kind of a social as well as economic development by ensuring the transition to green economy. But that transition needs to be focused upon. For example, there we can have multi-ministerial task force or joint working groups which are catering to energy transition across all these major economies, where they are able to find solutions for the transition not only in the developed countries but also in the developing nations. Because in developing nations like India, the problem is very different. The problem is not that suddenly we will deploy all our resources into solar energy. We have to ensure that we are able to fulfill the growing requirements of the economy as well. For many of the developed countries, they have already reached their level of peak emissions, or they are going to reach there very soon. But in India, as the population is still increasing and we have a massive requirement for economic growth, so that will always increase the amount of emissions, just as an example. So that transition need not or should not at any cost impact the economic growth process. That is very important for us as a country, as an economy, to be able to pull out large number of masses struck below the poverty line still, who are facing various different types of deprivations. So that is where we need to have an impact-free transition, and that needs to be monitored. Then aligning the investments by the various different global institutes as well as the multilateral funding organizations that we have. So investment should be encouraged, for example, in large-scale deployment of renewable energy, where if you take investments or carry out investment in the renewable energy sector, you are provided with a kind of an incentivization. So here, investments, for example, in the renewable sector, energy like solar, winds, right? So that funding needs to be accelerated, and when the funding is carried out, there should be an easy availability of capital at an easier rates made available for the economies who are trying to promote, for example, let's say green steel, for example, green hydrogen. Now, hydrogen clearly is one of the fuels for the future, where it will always produce a kind of a cleaner environment as a byproduct. But when we talk about things such as green steel, now steel sector is one of the most carbon intensive sectors out there, in the sense that for the production of steel, the amount of carbon dioxide equivalents which are released into the atmosphere is almost unparalleled. For a country which is increasing its growth pace, which is increasing its level of investment in infrastructure at an unparalleled pace, that is for a country like India, the ability to produce green steel is going to be very monumental for us to be able to achieve a cleaner environment in the future. So here there should be an incentivized funding for green steel, green hydrogen, okay, etc. And this needs to be promoted across the entirety of the G20 forum, because mind you, at the end of all these points, the basic key driver of all these points is that all these countries who are convening under the aegis of G20, they are the biggest countries in terms of the responsibility when it comes to impacting the climate across the globe. So they are the ones who are impacting the climate at an unparalleled rate. Then the public procurement which is carried out by the various different governments, that also needs to be greener, in the sense they need to propagate or promote the green public procurement policies as well. Now here it also urges for transparency. Transparency amongst the G20 members, and also if they induce a sense of, or if they promote a sense of transparency, that will set a good example for rest of the world to follow as well. Now, where does the aspect of transparency come here or fit here? So when we talk about transparency in this context, you have to understand that all the countries, they are carrying out their own policy measures, they are carrying out their own procedures in order to reduce the level of emissions out there. But how much is being carried out? What is the amount of carbon dioxide which is still being emitted? What is the amount that we are curtailing every year? Whether it is hampering the economic growth in any particular sector or not. So that needs to be stressed upon and indicated publicly. So for example, the G20 energy transitions. Now we had the environmental meet for the G20 ministers. Now they all talked about the just and affordable energy transition. So many of the countries, in the name of energy transition, they are indicating very good things out there for the world, that we are generating so much amount of green energy. But then the reality is something different, where they are also increasing the mix of the fossil fuel produced energy. For example, in the light of the Russia-Ukraine war, many of the European countries, they have increased their consumption of fossil fuel out there in the world. Now, that in a way contradicts the very aspiration to be able to combat climate change. Now, if there's a transparency which is maintained, transparency which is promoted by the G20 nations, that will always set up good examples. So this is a kind of a way forward, that what should be the agenda setting which needs to be done at this G20 meet in the second week of September, and that can hold a pathway for the later following important meets, such as the United Nations Climate for Action. Then you also have the Conference of Parties number 28, which is going to be held under the aegis of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it will be an agenda setting exercise for that. Coming to the third article, which has also appeared in your portion of the editorial page itself, and that is about the reinvigoration or the rejuvenation of the Indo-Greek relationship. Now, after the BRICS summit, which was held in Johannesburg in South Africa, Indian Prime Minister visited the region or the country of Greece, and there, amidst the various different processes which were initiated in order to improve the level of relationship, various promises were also made that we will allow the relationship to reach the heights which it has never done so. Because the visit by the Prime Minister was one of the first visits after a span of 40 years. That is, this was the first major prime ministerial visit from India into Greece after a span of 40 years. So, when you don't have a high level visit happening to any particular country, oftentimes the relationships, they take a back seat and they continue to move on in an autopilot mode. Presently, the Indo-Greek relationships, they are largely comprised to tourism as well as some amount of trade and also the movement of services and skilled labor force, amounting to a very meager $2 billion of the trade exchange and the tourism revenue itself. So that is a large untapped avenue for India. Now, when you talk about the position and the location of Greece, that is very important to understand that why India is suddenly trying to reactivate its entire relationship in the region. For example, if you take a look at the location here, Greece. Now, Greece also is positioning itself as a gateway to Europe. Earlier, Turkey used to position itself like that. But Turkey, under Erdogan, has basically aligned in certain manner and in certain areas where it is not a friend of the world or the larger geopolitical world anymore. It is making newer enemies. For example, even the India-Turkey relationship is not as good as it used to be because of the various statements that Turkey has made on international fora against India and also against the region of Kashmir, and also they have interfered in our internal matters, which is not and should never be taken upon in light and kind manner. So Indo-Turkey relationship is not in the best of the shape, and India is improving its relationship with all the neighboring areas, including Greece, including Cyprus. In all these various countries, our relationship has been taken to all the next level. But when we talk about Indo-Greek relationship, there, despite having a large 40-year lull, there are plans to improve the relationship to a strategic level. And when we talk about the strategic level of partnership, you have dialogues amongst the top members of the government, you have a deeper level of involvement in terms of the global geostrategic vision for the future and also aligning your plans for development in the future. So that elevation of relationship to the strategic level is being sought into. A dialogue mechanism has been set for the national security advisors to frequently communicate with each other, to apprise each other of the various geopolitical realities which are prevalent in each other's region, and also a skilled migration and mobility partnership is being sought, whereby we can have more number of skilled people moving into Greece, and also India being able to earn significant amount of trade revenue as a form of software sector exports as well. Then cooperation of Greece will also be significantly meaningful in order to complete the India-European Union Free Trade Agreement on connectivity partnership. So these are the plans which have been charted out for the future. What is the present status? And where is it that we have a common meeting ground? So India and Greece, they find a lot of commonality due to their shared past. Now, it is always cited very famously that the first Indo-Greek relationship started in around 326 BC when Alexander invaded India. So that was the first point of contact. But then the contact did not go on for a long period of time. Now, Greek Prime Minister basically, after his re-election recently, that is where his position has also been strengthened, and that is where a high-level meeting and visit was also arranged. Now, the Greek Prime Minister said that it is only natural for the next century to witness a growing and a stronger relationship between the first democracy of the world and the largest democracy of the world. First democracy there he indicated Greece, and largest democracy he indicated as India. So here he talked about the aspect of the democratic alignment. Now, in terms of economy, India is pursuing the policy of Atmanirbharta and also Make in India policy, where we are seeking to enhance our domestic manufacturing rate. So Make in India policy perfectly aligns with Greece's economic gateway to Europe, where our supply to the entirety of the Europe can be pivoted around the regions such as Greece, because obviously the rest of the gateways to Europe, that is not very attractive as of now, and our relationship with Turkey is not in the best of the shape. So Greece can be an chosen alternative. Restoration of art and artifacts. Now, both India as well as Greece, we had a very tumultuous colonial background, where the colonial powers have ravaged these countries, and the very vital arts and artifacts and sculptures and the monuments, they have been destroyed to the bits. So there, both of them can seek a common platform such as UNESCO and seek help to each other in restoring these artifacts, monuments, with each other's expertise involved. Then maintenance of maritime security. Now, maritime security and the maritime trade is being impacted across the entirety of the world. So that is where both of these nations, whose dependence is significant on the presence of the maritime boundaries, so there both of them can benefit. The China problem and the Turkey problem. Turkey problem we have already talked about. Now, Turkey doesn't share a very good relationship with Greece as well. Turkey doesn't share a good relationship with Cyprus as well. India is developing a strategic relationship with Greece. India already has a strategic relationship with Cyprus. But when we talk about the Chinese problem, now, if you are aware of the recent past, now Greece also had a kind of a very turbulent past, economic past, in terms of the Chinese investments. Now, the Chinese investments happened in very large bulk, as is the case across the world. Now, later on, many of the Greek companies and the entire economy in itself went into recession. It was unable to pay those loans, and many of the sectors, they defaulted. So Greece is also very wary about the Chinese economic model of lending help. And Greece seeks a newer partner. Greece seeks a newer alternative. And in that scenario, India fits rightly into the place. Overall, you have to understand that India's increased and growing relationship with countries like Cyprus, countries like Greece, and Greece's growing relationship with countries like Israel, that bonds perfectly into the new emerging jigsaw picture of the new global geostrategic order out there, where Turkey is increasingly aligning its interests with countries such as Pakistan and China India needs to seek an alternative as well. Moving on to the next article that is also going to be relevant for the portion of science and tech. So here, news media versus OpenAI's ChatGPT. Now, OpenAI's platform, the chatbot ChatGPT, is something which is very prominent. All of us would also have used it. All of you would know about the advantages and also the threats that the ChatGPT and such platforms they pose. So here, various different news media platform, a group of news media organizations including the New York Times, Reuters, CNN and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, that is ABC, they shut off the accessibility of OpenAI's ChatGPT into their platforms. They shut it off. Now there are a series of reasons why this has happened. For that, you need to understand the basics about how this ChatGPT operates. I'm sure most of you would already be aware about it. But when we talk about the models such as ChatGPT, they do operate on what is referred to as the LLMs. They belong to the category of LLMs, or large language models. Now these large language models, they are able to give an apt response to any of your queries based upon their own browsing of the entire text and how the humans communicate. So basically they scan through all the data which is available on the internet, various articles, news reports, etc. And accordingly machine learning happens. So for this, they need to go through a series of various different news websites out there. Now, the problem that these news websites have as of now is that they allege that ChatGPT is infringing their copyrights, in the sense that ChatGPT is picking up content directly from their news articles and their news portals, and it is putting up out there without providing enough credit or without providing the source in question as well. So that brings various different issues into question. That brings the issue of the intellectual propriety. That if, let's suppose, ChatGPT will continue to hammer out such particular excerpts from the various different articles out there, from the various different news portals out there, then what is the benefit of maintaining these news portals at all? So that is why you have the problem of ChatGPT which these organizations are facing. Now, all these LLMs, that is the large language model programs, now for that matter, even Google in a way is serving as an LLM. Now, many of these programs, they use what is referred to as crawlers. Now, crawlers or spiders in software analogy or in the software context, now that talks about the program, the software program which will scan through the entirety of the text available in the internet and learn accordingly and pick off materials from there. Now here you might have a kind of a query that something very similar is done by Google bot as well, the Google chatbot as well, where if you search anything on the internet, the Google will give you the excerpts from the articles of, let's say, the New York Times, the Reuters, the CNN, the ABC, etc. So why is it that these platforms don't have a problem with Google, but they have a problem with ChatGPT? That is largely because when you talk about the platforms such as Google or let's suppose Bing, etc. Now in all these, whenever you provide any kind of search, and you would have seen that whenever you provide any kind of search there they will show you the required solution along with the links. They will in a way redirect many of the traffic, and significant amount of traffic is traffic in the sense the internet, online traffic. Traffic is directed to these news portals. So the news portals are also happy that fair enough, let Google have its own day under the sun, but we are also benefiting because now more people are reading our content as compared to our niche subscribers. So there they don't have a problem. But then when it comes to chatbots like ChatGPT, they are simply picking off and ripping off the content without providing any kind of credit. So that means there is going to be a impropriety and there is going to be a copyright infringement, for which it is presumed that New York Times might drag OpenAI to court as well. And there the aspect is very simple. Now, previously you had the situation where a few set of novelists, they had banned ChatGPT from accessing their resources because they thought that it vitiates the literary creativity that they have put up. And meanwhile, that aspect of taking credit or providing credit where it is due, that needs to be done because ChatGPT recently has entered into an agreement with the Associated Press in order to access their entire archive for the machine learning, for the LLM model that we have talked about. So ChatGPT is also aware of that, or OpenAI is also aware of that eventuality. But what happens if all these news organizations, they shut down the access? So the quality of product in terms of ChatGPT in itself, that will reduce. And with the lowering quality of the product, nobody will consume it anymore. As of now, ChatGPT or OpenAI is benefiting from these all institutes, media houses, and it has become a global behemoth close to worth around $30 billion. Whereas if the access is shut down, that can plummet very soon. Okay, so this is the push and pull factor which exists. It is all about copyright infringement, and if that copyright continues to get infringed, what is the outcome? That also we have talked about. So the technical terminologies that you have to be aware of, which can be relevant for your prelims here. So here it is relevant for your prelims overall. So what is LLM? So they are a type of AI that can mimic human intelligence. They use statistical models to analyze vast amounts of data, learning the patterns and connections between words and phrases, how to arrange them and put it back together for the consumable type of material which the audience requires. Now, crawlers, sometimes they are also referred to as the robots or spiders. Now, it is a generic term for any program, software program, that is used to automatically discover and scan the various websites by following links from one web page to another. So they will mimic and scan the entirety of it and go for machine learning. So Google's main crawler is called Googlebot. This is relevant only for your prelims purposes. Then we come at few of the other articles which are relevant for your prelims. So Moody's report has indicated that population growth in countries such as India, it is not a panacea. Panacea in the sense a final solution out there. So many of the times we talk about the aspect of demographic dividend, isn't it? So what is demographic dividend? So demographic dividend in a very simple term is the benefit that you can ascribe, that you can get based upon the qualitative standards of your population, based upon the various details or the classification of your population. For example, in a country like India, where close to around 65% of the population is below the age of 35 years, that means up till the year 2038, we might have the largest working age population across the world. And that is why with various different countries, even in the case of Indo-Greek relationship, you would have seen that services export and skilled workers, their interchange is being sought after. So by 2038, it is assumed that we will have a very large workforce and our economic benefit will follow that. But then, what this report has indicated is the fact that just the aspect or the presence of population is not enough if the educational standards, they are not taken care of. And this report indicates that the educational standard in India, which it equates to the educational standard in Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. So in these countries, the education standard is quite low as compared to countries such as China, which means that going ahead into the future, China will have much more trained professionals out there. China will have much better scope and a much better hit at the global growth as compared to the low skilled workers and the low skilled population that India has. So that means the solution to improve our overall economic growth and developmental pathway is to provide qualitative education. So here you need to be aware of what that demographic dividend is, and if that demographic dividend is not utilized, if everybody is having a low skill level, then they will not be able to find meaningful jobs out there. Because when you are competing with the market forces, when you are trying to seek your own role in the international market, so in that situation, what will always happen is that you will be compared with the best of the world. And there, if your skill level is less, obviously you will not be desired. So that will increase the amount of the low wage jobs out there where your income level is very low. And also, it will increase the amount of unemployment. So that is where the countries, they get oftentimes trapped, what is referred to as in the low to middle income trap, where if you get trapped in that, you will have a meager or a moderate or a stagnating economic growth, and everybody will be working for the low wage jobs. The highly skilled jobs won't be created, which are required to provide the sudden momentum in growth. So in that case, with the increasing or burgeoning unemployment, it can also lead to demographic disaster. What is that? Demographic disaster. That is where the population in a way becomes a burden for the country. So for that, quality education, quality infrastructure to facilitate all that human capital growth. Then a brief news about the current account deficit. So India's current account deficit, that has narrowed in Q1 of this year. It has narrowed to 1% of GDP, and that is basically on the aspect of significant amount of exports. However, the amount of exports are reducing, especially in the merchandise exports, that is reducing. So it is expected that in the next quarter, that current account deficit is going to increase. While the figures and numbers here are not at all relevant for your examination, what you need to understand is the basic of this current account deficit. So what is it? It is a measurement of a country's trade where the value of the goods and services it imports exceeds the value of the products it exports. So basically, the difference between your export and import, okay, that should be healthy. Ideally, it should be, you should have a current account surplus rather than a deficit where you are exporting more, importing less. But we have not attained that phase for a very long period of time. Very briefly, around the year 2003, we did achieve current account surplus for a brief period and a brief duration, and that was purely based upon our software exports. China has enjoyed current account surplus for a better part of the last 3 decades. So that has brought about a significant spurt in the growth momentum for China. Now, current account includes basically net income such as interest and dividends and transfers such as foreign aid. And although these components make up a small percentage of the total current account, it represents a country's foreign transactions, and like the capital account, is a component of the balance of payment. So this basic that you are aware of, that will be more than sufficient, more than relevant for your examination. Then, coming to the last article, that how the scientists found out that LK99 is probably not a superconductor. Now, what do we mean by a superconductor? So here, the very basic of conduction is what? Let's suppose you have any material out there. Now, if you provide charge or electricity to flow through that, there will be some amount of resistance. Resistance will be offered, isn't it? Resistance is offered. Now, this resistance which is offered by the material, oftentimes that leads to the heating of the material, and there is huge amount of power loss. When it comes to electrical lines of transference of electricity from one region, from the generating station to the consumer level, you will find that you have a significant amount of that transfer losses, where due to the resistance of those wires, lot of that power which is generated is actually lost. It never reaches the consumers. The power generating companies, they keep that into account and they generate a bit surplus as per what is consumed. Now, the superconductors and the very principle driving around them has always been an area of acute interest for the scientists out there, because if you have a superconductor, then all these losses can be warded off. We will have a better usage of technology such as magnetic levitation or maglev trains that you see operating in the case of China, because these superconductors will also have an enhanced reactivity or an enhanced property when it comes to magnetic field. Then also you have the better MRIs which can be calculated or which can be brought out. So significant advancements can be done even in the case of medical sciences as well, diagnostic sciences as well. So overall, it can have, even in quantum computing, these superconductors can be very useful. So overall, the benefit is significant. But for a long time, whenever the scientists, they have basically discovered any element to indicate even an iota of superconductivity, they have found that the element will be able to carry out that property at a temperature close to around minus 250 or even minus 200 degrees Celsius. Now that is very low temperature. That low temperature, in order to achieve that in itself, is going to involve a large amount of energy in the process. So it is not sustained for a daily and a consumer utilization. Now, there was certain materials which were earlier thought to have superconductivity, but there the temperature, even though if it could be carried out at a room temperature, it required so much amount of pressure. That is something which is available only at the core of the planet. So again, all of these are not practically feasible to be carried out. Now there comes the role of a scientific research paper which was published by two of the scientists of South Korea. And they indicated that a material, that is LK99, that has indicated superconductivity and the property of superconductivity at ambient room temperature. Now this LK99 is a unique mixture where it is driven around the phosphate oxides. So you have phosphate ion in a tetrahedral structure, right, with oxygen. So you have the phosphate oxides out there. Now in between the phosphate oxides, lead is put through. Okay, lead is put through. And in the entire matrix out there, you also have some amount of lead being replaced by copper. Okay, so this entire structure without copper is what is referred to as lead apatite. Now this lead apatite is made to undergo a reaction with copper, where in certain areas you have copper which is present, and that is LK99, which is supposed to impart superconductivity. That is the entire fiasco around it. Now various different scientific institutions across the world, be it in India, be it in Europe, be it in Africa as well, all of them, they carried out their individual researches to find out whether this indeed can have superconductivity. Now this material has failed on many accounts. Now it has been found out that this material at ambient temperature is not acting as a superconductor. In fact, it is ferromagnetic, where if you rub a magnet against it, even this material will get magnetized. Now that is not at all a property of a superconductor. So here, out of this particular article, what is it that you have to extract for your examination? What is this LK99 composed of? So which are the important elements? What are the benefits of superconductivity? Under normal circumstances, superconductivity is attained at what particular or ambient temperature? And the overall sectors where they can lend a help. Superconductors, they don't indicate ferromagnetism in the sense that they will never have the property of getting magnetized if you rub another magnet with it. So these properties are relevant for your multiple statement type questions which are framed in the prelims. Okay, so now let us take a look at the subjective questions which can be framed from here, and let us have an idea about how to frame the answers. So in the context of software, what are crawlers? Discuss the pulls which exist between the media channels and AI chatbots like ChatGPT. Now this kind of question is very much expected to be asked this particular year. Now here the answer has to be very direct, even though it is a 15-marker question. So here the introduction will be consumed by the definition of what are crawlers. The crawlers definition which we have provided in the PPT in the session itself, that will work. And after that, talk about the various different aspects. Why is it that these news media channels, they are up in arms against these platforms? Okay, so here you can talk about the copyright infringement, how these crawlers, they take up all the data, they don't provide any credit for that, so it lowers or dilutes the quality which is provided, and that is something around which many of them have decided to shut it down. Now you also have to talk about the outcomes of it. What will be the outcome? The outcome will be the reduced quality which is offered by products such as ChatGPT if their access is not provided. The other outcome can be that if, let's suppose, ChatGPT starts providing some amount of royalty to all of these institutes or news media organizations, then its earnings in itself will reduce, and overall the company's entire size will be reduced quite significantly. All these outcomes, what is the way forward? Finding out a middle ground where ChatGPT, just like the Google chatbot, is able to provide the relevance and the links as well to these news media channels, but there also comes the danger, then there is nothing differentiating that AI with the already existing bots such as the Google bot. So all this you can encapsulate. In the final conclusion part, you have to write the way forward that technology is something whose time you cannot stop. Once the time has come, technology will come. The way out is not the way of conflict, but the way is in terms of cooperation. So that is where all the content providers in this case need to come together, develop a standard operating procedure whereby the consumers are also benefited, their accessibility is not denied, and they also get the benefit of it. Okay, then discuss the role that international forums like the G20 can play in enhancing the fight against climate change. Now this is a very direct question of 10 marks. So here in the portion of the introduction, you simply write about the fact that how these international forums such as the G20, they represent the member countries who are responsible for majority of the emissions and majority of the actions which are impacting the climate. So any action based on their part can be a global trend setting as an example for the future path laying against climate justice. After that, you initiate the discussion about all the way forwards that we have discussed, that what can be done, how they can improve jointness, how they can improve transparency, and overall without hampering any kind of transition to the cleaner energy. And in the conclusion, very briefly in a couple of sentences, you write about that how if these countries, they don't take an action now, the world will take a bad example out of it, and climate change is an eventuality that many of us are facing in our day-to-day lives. So that is how you can conclude the answer. So that will be all for the discussion for the day. So I hope the session has been productive and a learning exercise for all of you. If you like the content, please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. And again, I would suggest and advise all of you, go to the Telegram channel, take up your own internal assessment of the multiple choice questions which can be framed, and try to gauge the level of understanding. So till we meet again, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.